Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. As Pakistan celebrates its 74th Independence Day today, President Arif Alvi says Islamabad will continue to highlight Indian oppression and siege in occupied Kashmir as the ambassador of Kashmiris on all international forums. In his message, Prime Minister Imran Khan said Pakistan in past 7 decades confronted multiple internal and external challenges with resilience. Pakistan is holding festivities with social distancing protocols today. Israel says its warplanes have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip for the 5th time this week. The Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas aerial defense post and underground infrastructure in response to last week's explosive balloons. No casualties have been reported from the raid so far. Palestine says UAE has betrayed Jerusalem and the Palestinian cause by striking a deal with Israel on the normalization of relations. In a statement, President Mahmoud Abbas said the Palestinian leadership rejects the surprising announcement. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry has also recalled its ambassador to UAE on the orders of the president. The UN Security Council has started voting on a US bid to indefinitely extend an arms embargo on Iran under the 2015 nuclear deal. UN diplomats say the results of the extension vote will be announced after 24 hours. The 15-member council has been operating virtually amid the coronavirus pandemic, so states have a day to cast their votes. The US has reported 1,131 deaths from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, taking the toll to over 167,000, with more than 5 million cases. In India, 1,007 more people have died, increasing the toll to over 48,000. Meanwhile, Pakistan's death count has reached 6,139 among over 286,000 cases. The global number of deaths has crossed 755,000, with over 20.9 million infected. News coming up in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now. As Pakistan celebrates its 74th Independence Day today, President Arif Alvi says Islamabad will continue to highlight Indian oppression and siege in occupied Kashmir as the ambassador of Kashmiris on all international forums. Addressing the flag hoisting ceremony in Islamabad, President Alvi said Prime Minister Imran Khan's smart lockdown turned out to be the most effective strategy in the world to fight COVID-19. In his message, Prime Minister Khan said Pakistan in the past 7 decades confronted multiple internal and external challenges with resilience. Pakistan is holding festivities with social distancing protocols today. The celebration started with 31-gun salute in the federal capital and 21-gun salute in the provincial headquarters. The day marks a renewed commitment to the vision of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of the country. In Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, people are celebrating Independence Day as Thanksgiving Day. Meanwhile, to stop Kashmiris from celebrating Pakistan's Independence Day, New Delhi has intensified its curfew in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Witnesses say occupation forces have increased patrolling and monitoring activities. Officials say a random search of vehicles is being carried out near Sher-e-Kashmir Cricket Stadium. The stadium is the venue for the main event of India's Independence Day tomorrow. This will be the first Independence Day ceremony in the valley since it was illegally annexed and besieged by India on August 5th last year. The division of British India into two independent Dominion states, Pakistan and India, ended Crown rule in the subcontinent in 1947. But the unattended boundary disputes between the two countries have resulted into a complex situation. Within months, India and Pakistan were embroiled in a war over Kashmir, the consequences of which still affect millions of people today. This report has more details.
73 years ago, Pakistan and India emerged as two independent countries on the map of the world. However, what is described as an unfinished agenda of the British India's partition, the territorial disputes such as the Kashmir issue have become a festering wound.
Across the LOC are two nuclear powers, and Kashmir has become a flashpoint. God forbid, if things spin out of control, the world will be sucked into that situation.
Over the past 7 decades, both Pakistan and India have fought several wars without finding a durable and acceptable solution to a problem that should have been justly settled 73 years ago.
The colonial master wanted to teach you a lesson because you asked for a separate homeland. There is an unfinished agenda of your independence because the Muslim majority areas were to join hands with Pakistan and become a whole country. And unfortunately, the colonial masters of that time, what they did was that they deliberately left a few things in limbo.
Colonization of a different kind took place. So it was not independence of freedom, complete independence of freedom. Nehru family conspired with Mountbatten, and Gurdaspur, which was awarded to Pakistan logically, on the morning of the 15th, it was part of India. Had Gurdaspur district not gone to India, Kashmir would have, Indian access to Kashmir would have been probably limited.
With the pending UN Security Council resolutions, a referendum in Kashmir remains a moral imperative, besides being a democratic necessity. Experts believe the Kashmir dispute has now become the nuclear flashpoint, with deadly ramifications for the whole world. Reporting for Indus News, Isa Naqvi, Islamabad.
Minorities have played a key role in the progress of Pakistan since its inception on the 14th of August 1947. Be it Hindus, Sikhs, Parsis or other ethnic communities, their role in the development of the country is very vital. More in this report.
Pakistan is celebrating 73 years of its existence, and through it all, the country has stood tall with its diverse religious communities. With an increased role of minorities towards a united nation, the country has pushed aside the scars of partition.
Different Sikh guys working in different fields, like mostly you can see also in Parliament House, they are working as a politician. Some people are working in a medical field. So, of course, you can see an education department. I'm proud to be Pakistani and I love my country. Pakistan Zindabad.
Assistant Priest Father Kamran Daniel draws attention to the role of Christians towards creating an independent Pakistan.
From the creation of Pakistan, the largest province, which is Punjab, it got separated from Indian Punjab because of the vote of the Christians. There was a slogan, "Jo mangega Pakistan jayega wo kabristan." A Christian parliamentarian raised the slogan, "Seene mein goli khayenge, Pakistan banayenge." Very few people know that this slogan was raised by a Christian.
Non-Muslims constitute about 3.7% of the total population in Pakistan. Under the constitution of the country, minorities are granted the freedom of worship, right to equality and non-discrimination. As Pakistan turns 73 years old today, people of all religions and faiths continue to live in peace and harmony. Reporting for Indus News, Manahil Ahmed, Islamabad.
Moving on now, Israel says its warplanes have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip for the 5th time this week. The Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas aerial defense posts and underground infrastructure in retaliation to last week's incendiary balloon attacks. No casualties have been reported from the raid so far. The raid comes after the UAE and Israel signed a peace deal to normalize ties between the two countries. The Israeli army frequently organizes airstrikes on the border areas where it claims explosive kites and balloons are prepared. The Gaza Strip has been reeling under a crippling Israeli blockade by air, land and sea since 2007. In a related development, Palestine says the UAE has betrayed Jerusalem and the Palestinian cause by striking a deal with Israel on the normalization of ties. In a statement, President Mahmoud Abbas said the Palestinian leadership rejects the announcement. His remarks come after the UAE and Israel reached a peace deal with U.S. mediation. The agreement was sealed in a phone call between U.S. President Donald Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. Under the deal, Israel has agreed to suspend its plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. But Netanyahu later said the seizure plans were only delayed, not suspended. Condemning the agreement, Abbas recalled the Palestinian envoy to UAE.
The Palestinian leadership announces that it rejects and denounces the surprise trilateral UAE, Israeli and US announcement about a full normalization of relations between the Israeli occupation state and the United Arab Emirates in return for a claimed calm and temporary suspension of the annexation plot of the Palestinian lands and Israeli sovereignty over it.
Abbas also urged the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to call an urgent meeting and reject the deal. Now moving on to Yemen, where the Saudi-led coalition says it downed a drone and 2 ballistic missiles launched by the Houthi rebels towards Saudi Arabia. In a statement, coalition spokesperson Turki Al-Malki said a booby-trapped drone was aimed at civilian infrastructure in Khamis Mushaid city. He said the rebels continue to breach the Stockholm Agreement and the Hudaydah ceasefire. Al-Malki said Houthis are using the Hudaydah governorate as a launch site. He said the actions of rebels are a credible threat to regional and international security. The spokesperson said the coalition will continue to take proper measures to confront hostile and terrorist acts by the Houthis. Now, the UN Security Council has started voting on a U.S. bid to indefinitely extend an arms embargo on Iran under the 2015 nuclear deal. UN diplomats say the results of the extension vote will be announced after 24 hours. The 15-member council has been operating virtually amid the coronavirus pandemic, so states have a day to cast their vote. The 13-year-old arms embargo is due to expire in October under a deal among Iran, Russia, China, Germany, United Kingdom, France and the United States. In 2016, Washington opted out of the agreement and reimpose some sanctions on Tehran. On Tuesday, the US slashed its draft resolution to just 4 paragraphs in a bid to gain more council support. The two veto powers, Russia and China, earlier opposed an extension of the arms ban on Tehran. A top US diplomat says the Federal Bureau of Investigation will join a probe into last week's explosion in Beirut, which killed close to 200 people. Under Secretary for Political Affairs David Hale said the Bureau was invited by Lebanese authorities on a tour of a demolished Beirut neighborhood. He said Lebanon needed economic and fiscal reforms to make sure things like this never happen again. Hale also said the FBI will help answer questions about the circumstances that led up to the explosion. Reiterating Washington's support for Beirut, he said this is one of many ways that America is extending its hand to the Lebanese people. Foreign countries have made clear they will not provide funds to Lebanon without action on long-demanded reforms. Now, 8 people have been killed in floods following torrential rains in eastern Sudan's Kassala town. Local officials say 23 villages and over 8,500 people have been affected by the disaster. He underlined that urgent aid is needed for the region. Earlier, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported that hundreds of homes had been destroyed due to floods. The OCHA said the disaster has forced the displacement of thousands of people across the region. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. The US has reported 1,131 deaths from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, taking the toll to over 167,000 with more than 5 million cases. The global number of deaths has crossed 755,000 with over 20.9 million infected. More details in this report.
The new coronavirus is tumbling records, overwhelming healthcare systems, and rolling back hopes of the economic revival in the Americas. In the US, President Donald Trump is pushing for schools to reopen regardless of the rising death toll. Trump has threatened to divert federal funding away from schools if they don't comply. While in Latin America, as fatalities and cases of COVID-19 surge, new vaccine agreements by regional countries have given a flicker of hope. But Brazil's handling of the pandemic has garnered criticism worldwide, with the country torn between saving lives and its economy.
We go on with life. We cannot get scared by the pandemic. We have to be careful, take care of the elderly because they are more vulnerable to the virus, and to go on with life. I have always said, and I repeat this here, we have two major problems ahead, that is the virus and unemployment. Both should be taken care of responsibly and at the same time.
The resurgence of the virus in Germany, France, Spain, and Italy has forced the countries to retreat their easing of travel restrictions. UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the government will be ruthless over its quarantine rules, even with the countries like France. Australia's COVID-19 nightmare has finally started showing signs of slowing down as number of new cases dwindle. Meanwhile, re-emergence of the disease in New Zealand has prompted fresh lockdowns and search for patient zero in trying to contain the virus once more. But the government officials say panic and hysteria is not the solution.
The problem is the virus. It is not people. People are the solution. We need to remember that the cause of this worldwide COVID-19 pandemic and the response in New Zealand and globally is this new virus. There is no blame or stigma attached to anyone having COVID-19, and we should treat each other as we would want to be treated, with dignity and respect.
In China, experts have found traces of coronavirus in imported food from Brazil and Ecuador. The revelation disproves World Health Organization's claim that food cannot contribute to the spread of the infectious disease.
Moreover, in India, 1,007 people lost their lives to COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, with the death toll crossing 48,000. More than 64,000 people tested positive overnight, with the nationwide tally crossing 2.4 million. The Ministry of Health and Family Welfare says there are over 661,000 active cases in the country. India is the third worst affected country in the world after the US and Brazil. Meanwhile, Pakistan's COVID-19 curve has flattened, with no spike in cases reported for almost 2 weeks now. The death toll in the country has reached 6,153, while the total cases are over 287,000. The Health Ministry said over 265,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. It said there are nearly 16,000 active cases in the country, among which 774 are in a critical condition. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 125,000 infections, while Punjab has reported nearly 95,000 cases. Now, North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-Un has appointed Kim Tok-hun as the new premier of the country. State media said the decision was made at the Politburo meeting of the ruling Workers' Party. Kim Tok-hun chaired the Parliamentary Budget Committee before his ascent to the premiership. The new premier replaces Kim Jae-ryong, who took charge of the role in April 2019. The state media did not provide any reason for the replacement. Moving on, the U.S. says Chinese government-funded cultural centers at American universities will be required to register as foreign missions. In a statement, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Confucius Institutes are advancing Beijing influence in the United States. Pompeo's remarks are the latest sign of the deteriorating relationship between Washington and Beijing. He said the U.S. action aims to ensure that American educators can make informed choices about whether these programs should be allowed to continue. Pompeo said the U.S. wants to ensure that students have access to Chinese culture free from the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. Confucius Institutes are Chinese government-funded cultural and linguistic centers that operate on U.S. university campuses. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he has requested the suspension of private charter flights to all Cuban airports. In a statement, Pompeo said the move will deny economic resources to the Raul Castro regime and inhibit its capacity to carry out abuses. He claimed that the Cuban military own and operate a large number of hotels and tourism infrastructure in the country. Pompeo said Washington will continue to target and cut the revenue of Cuban government. President Donald Trump has ramped up sanctions against Cuba since taking office in 2017. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he is determined to reach a trade deal with the European Union. After meeting his Northern Irish counterpart, Michael Martin, Johnson said London wants an agreement but will not bend on the issue of level playing field commitments. Earlier, the UK's chief Brexit negotiator David Frost said Britain's assessment is that a withdrawal agreement can be reached with the EU in September. In a tweet, he said London is not looking for a special or unique agreement. He said UK wants a deal like the EU has agreed with other friendly countries like Canada. The chief Brexit negotiator said UK's sovereignty over laws, courts and fishing waters is not up for discussion. Now, the US says it's satisfied with China's progress in meeting commitments to purchase US goods in the Phase 1 trade deal. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow said despite the ongoing tensions with Beijing, both countries are progressing well over the Phase 1 trade deal. Kudlow said Beijing is now buying over 40% of US commodity exports compared to about 20% in the baseline year of 2017. He said the jump in imports is providing a boost to American agriculture and farm sector. The U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and China's Vice Premier Liu He are set to hold the first semi-annual review of the deal on Sunday. Despite the encouraging signs, Beijing is well behind the promised target of $77 billion increase in imports this year due to the coronavirus pandemic. Airbnb says it's restricting the ability of people under 25 in Britain, France and Spain from renting entire homes via its platform. The move has been introduced to reduce unauthorized parties and ensure safety. Airbnb said people under 25 years old with less than 3 positive ratings will be banned from renting entire homes close to where they live. It said the company will test the new rule in the 3 European countries only. The company also said that those with 3 positive reviews and no negative reviews are not subject to this restriction. Since last year, Airbnb has been cracking down as massive parties have caused problems with neighbors in certain communities. Most Asia-Pacific markets are trading higher as investors remain cautious after a US Congress deadlock over the COVID-19 stimulus bill. Australia's ASX 200 has risen almost 0.5% as shares of majority banks in the country gained. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 and Topix indices have gained fractionally, but South Korea's Kospi declined over 1%. While Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index traded near the flatline, Chinese mainland shares also edged up, with the Shenzhen Component Index adding almost 1%, and the Shenzhen Composite gaining over 0.5%. Now in football, RB Leipzig beat Atletico Madrid 2-1 at the Jose Alveide Stadium in one of the UEFA Champions League quarterfinals. The victory continues Leipzig's meteoric rise as they reach their first UCL semi-final just 11 years after their formation. The German club took the lead in the 51st minute through Dani Olmo. The goal prompted Atleti boss Diego Simeone to introduce Joao Felix, who scored a penalty to level the contest in the 71st minute. The Germans snatched victory with 2 minutes from time as Tyler Adams deflected shots nestled into the net, beating goalkeeper Jan Oblak. Leipzig will face French champions Paris Saint-Germain in the semi-final, with a place in the August 23 final at stake. And now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.